Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sporty's next webinar presentation on iPad Proficiency Check, how to fly with your iPad as a digital co-pilot, and so much more. My name is Bret Koebbe. I'll be the presenter today. I'm hosting this from Sporty's here at the Claremont County Airport. That's a good shot of the airport there from an aerial perspective. I'm actually sitting overlooking the runway 22 on this last day of summer. So very nice day here at Cincinnati, Ohio, about 90 degrees. And then tomorrow, I think after a cold front, we're going to be down in the 60s. So a lot of activity here at our flight school and at Sporty's, as there always is. A little bit about me first. My background, currently ATP, fly wide variety of airplanes from a Cessna 172, Piper Aztec, also a corporate pilot on a Cessna Citation. And I've been using the iPad since it came out in 2010, so I've got a lot of experience with the product and a wide variety of airplanes. And looking forward to sharing some of the things I've learned over the years, tips and tricks, some of the latest app features, etc., and ForeFlight accessories for the cockpit, and some more advanced tips as well. For those that are just new to the iPad, there's lots to learn here as well. So this isn't just an advanced iPad presentation, going to cover a wide range of topics as it relates to that. I'm also a senior vice president here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. Day to day at Sporty's, I help with new product development, oversee production of our training courses. So the Sporty's Learn to Fly course, instrument rating course, commercial pilot course, etc. And a big part of that is software development. We also develop our pilot training app for iPhone and iPad. So I have my hands on that side as well, seeing what goes into building an app for those mobile products, as well as Android and smart TV products. So we really cover a wide range of development on the software side. Also editor of a website called iPad Pilot News, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Now, as far as the presentation today, we're going to go about an hour. Everyone here is in what's called listen only mode, so I can't see you, I can't hear you. You do have a question box in the GoToWebinar panel, so feel free to ask questions. I have a couple of colleagues here from Sporty's who will be able to answer those relatively quickly, so try to stump them the best you can and we'll get an answer. And if you do stump them, he'll present those to me at the end and see if I can help out with that as well. So use that as your kind of interactive tool there throughout the presentation. We're also recording the webinar today, so don't feel like you need to write everything down or capture it all. You can come back and watch this. We'll have it up tomorrow on the Sporty's YouTube channel, as well as that website I mentioned, iPad Pilot News. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover. This is a high level, and then we'll get into much more details later on. But this is an iPad proficiency check, so we're going to cover some of the legalities as it relates to the iPad, which there aren't a lot, fortunately, and that's why the product has prospered so well in aviation, because under Part 91, we have free use as GA pilots to use what we think is best to display aviation data in the cockpit. iPad flying strategies, again, lessons I've learned as a flight instructor, as a pilot who flies for fun, flies professionally, things I've learned about using the iPad in the cockpit. An area I really want to focus on, point number 3 there, is how to use it as a digital co-pilot. Most of us are flying single pilot, Part 91, and there's a lot of tools and features in today's aviation apps that have taken them much more than further than just being a sectional chart viewer or an instrument approach chart viewer, but tips and ways to make use of some of the proactive features in the iPad to make our single pilot flying safer for both VFR and IFR. And then we're going to wrap up with a look at data link weather, primarily as it relates to ADS-B, but a little bit on Sirius XM as well. Okay, so I mentioned iPadPilotNews.com. I'd say if you write one thing down today, this would be it, to come back and use this as a study source later. We founded this website, I think it was 2010 when the iPad 1, the original iPad came out. There was a lot of interest among pilots about how to use the iPad. And again, in the early days, that was how to use it as a chart viewer, to view sectional charts and a GPS moving map, the basics of how to mount it. And so we found that we went out and experimented and came up with a lot of ideas on how pilots could use this as a way to transition from paper charts. And so we came up with the website iPad Pilot News. Well, today we've written, I think, 400 or 500 articles. We do lots of videos, lots of quizzes, app reviews, etc. And there's a search feature on there. So anything that you hear today, I'd highly recommend going onto that website and searching for that topic. And you're very likely to find a in-depth article more about that. And again, whether it's how to mount your iPad or how to use the latest ForeFlight features, how to use some of the settings of the iPad, you're going to find it on there. We also put out a bi-weekly newsletter, so you can enter your email address on the website, and we'll send you the latest tips and tricks every 2 weeks, new articles, new content, etc. Okay, so we're going to cover a couple kind of frequently asked questions first as it relates to the iPad itself. The first one is, many of us are probably on our third or fourth iPad at this point. Again, considering that it came out in 2010, maybe considering an upgrade. There's also new pilots coming on the scene, student pilots thinking about purchasing an iPad for the first time. So what are the options currently? And here's a quick breakdown of what Apple currently sells as brand new products. On the far left is the iPad Pro. That comes in 11-inch and 12.9-inch sizes. That's probably more than most pilots need in the cockpit. Much more expensive, also starts at $799. And that iPad is really designed as almost a laptop replacement in terms of the processor, the capabilities, and the feature sets. Way overkill in terms of what we need in aviation. Now, if you want the best of the best and you're going to use it for other purposes, by all means, it's a great fit. Lightning fast, a good iPad, but it's probably not the best one to start with if you're just looking for a model to use in the airplane. Kind of in the middle of the road is the iPad Air, that 10.9-inch, the second from the left. That's probably the good, best bet for a good combination of performance, a nice screen. It has Apple's latest M1 processor, which is their own custom chip. Starts at $599. So again, not the cheapest version, but a good middle of the road. And then the entry level there, the third one is what they just call the iPad, a slightly smaller screen, but a much more affordable price. Starts at $329 for a 64 gigabyte model. So for those on a budget, that's really a great option. Now, me personally, I want to talk about the iPad mini, because that's what I think most pilots seem to find for the right kind of combination of a smaller screen size, but still high performance. Again, starting at a middle of the road price of $499, I think that's a great option for pilots. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that iPad mini. So basically, it has the Apple A15 Bionic processor. Doesn't mean a whole lot, but that's one of Apple's latest processors. And in the scheme of iPad, they can do video processing, they can do animations, they can do graphics. Our aviation apps really aren't taxing the hardware itself very much. And by the name A15, we're on a pretty far along generation and mature chip at this point. So more than powerful enough in to draw sectionals and to draw weather on the charts, to display synthetic vision. But what I really like about it, and again, I fly smaller airplanes for the most part, Cessna and Piper airplanes, is the way it mounts in the cockpit. You can find all kinds of creative places with suction cup mounts. Works well on a kneeboard. It's a great iPad just on the go. It's easy to pack. It's lightweight. It has some of the latest features like Touch ID for security. It has USB-C charging, which is very important to me. I like to try to use as many devices with USB-C as possible, so I'm not carrying a lot of extra charging cables. Also has Apple II Pencil support for those that like to interact with the Apple Pencil. Here's another picture here from a recent flight that I took down to Florida. That's in a Piper Aztec. But again, you can see it mounts, in this case with a clamp, to one of the roll bars up top there. Very easy to use it there. You can mount it to the glare shield, place it in your lap with a clip, a kneeboard, etc. So when pilots ask me what's my favorite iPad, I say the iPad Mini 6. Again, it also has a nice edge-to-edge screen design, so it doesn't have a whole lot of bezel space taking up real estate on the screen. Now, the next question that comes in when you look to purchase an iPad or upgrade, there's two versions. There's the Wi-Fi only version, or a version that has cellular data. This is probably the second most frequently asked question that we get here at Sporty's, and for those looking to upgrade or purchase an iPad. So the difference is they both have internet connectivity, both have Wi-Fi. The upgraded version allows you to connect to Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T when traveling. So you have internet connection basically wherever you're at on the ground. But Apple does something interesting. They also include a fully capable GPS chip in that cellular data model, which for pilots has very positive implications in that we can use it to navigate without a third-party accessory like an external GPS or another ADS-B receiver. The upgrade for this is typically around $130 extra, so not a whole lot in the scheme of things, in aviation dollars, to provide that GPS. Many pilots use this as a backup source of navigation, so they might have an ADS-B receiver or another GPS source attached to the iPad, but they look at this as a way, well, if that fails or I lose something on the panel, this is a great way to have a backup navigation source. And the key takeaway here you think cellular data, you're not going to maybe use that, and that's fine. You can buy that model, never activate the cellular service, but still take advantage of the GPS chip in the device. And the latest iPad mini I purchased, the iPad mini 6, has a much improved GPS chip. I don't have any kind of stats or figures to say that, but more anecdotally, after my use, it's much more sensitive. For example, I was on a Airbus flight out west. In the middle aisle, had the iPad on my lap, and I was still getting full GPS signal inside the airliner. So in any GA cockpit, Cessna, Piper, et cetera, even corporate jet, you're going to get good GPS coverage and reception in the cockpit. And I couldn't say that for models 3 or 4 years ago. The GPS was kind of finicky. It kind of went in and out unless you had a clear view of the sky, like you were outside of the vehicle. So this GPS in the latest iPad models really is a high performance and a good way to provide navigation data to your iPad. Okay, so with all that being said, should you update? There's one more consideration here. Many are probably familiar that Apple has events, typically September and October. They just held their iPhone event a couple weeks ago where they introduced the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Pro models. They talk and take their wraps off of iOS 16, which is the software update available for their iPhone and iPad. Now this year, the rumors are they're going to have another event in October where they're going to announce another set of iPads. Right now, the speculation is they're going to be introducing new iPad Pro models. That's the 11 and 12.9 inch. So if you are looking for that high-end iPad with the latest performance, rumors are that there'll be a new version coming out in a couple weeks. It'll have Apple's latest M2 processor. Again, from an aviation side, I don't think that's really worth holding out for. But if you need to buy that iPad Pro for other reasons, don't buy that yet. Now, again, that middle of the road version, the iPad Air, which also has an edge screen, about an 11-inch screen size, that just came out in March of this year. So if that's the one you're considering, now is a great time still to purchase that. You're going to get 5, 6 years out of it, likely, if not more. And then this top two, where I have the weight, I just say that because there's really no speculation or concrete evidence that they will introduce upgrades to those, but Apple doesn't, kind of tip their hat this kind of thing, and you really don't know until that event happens. So I would still suggest waiting until that October event, give it another couple weeks to see what they introduce. A lot of times there's sales related to that to the other models as well. So hold off if you can till October if you are looking to upgrade. Something different this year as well, and I want to just cover this before we get into the aviation topics because we got a lot of questions on this as well. So traditionally, Apple releases their latest iOS software updates around the time that the iPhone comes out. And about 3 years ago, I want to say, they actually split iOS, which is designed for iPhones, and they have a separate version called iPad OS, which is designed for iPads. And this year, they actually released iOS 16. It's available now for your iPhone, but your iPad still is running iPad OS 15. There's still some features in development that aren't quite ready yet. So Apple in their latest press conference back a couple weeks ago said iPad OS 16 will be available in October. So if you're looking at your iPad and wondering why you can't update to the 16 version, that's why. Now, with any update, whether it's your iPhone or your iPad, depending on what device you're using as your primary source of data in the cockpit, we always strongly suggest you wait until your aviation app developer gives the green light to upgrade. These are software changes. They could interfere with core services, again, like navigation, or the app might become buggy due to some conflicts. And, the app developers try to do their best to avoid that, but this is, a lot of times things happen. You just can't foresee. For example, Spotify, a popular music streaming app, stopped working on the latest watch update. Not something that's really life or death for most people, but again, this just kind of shows that there are bugs inherent in software updates. So always wait until, again, your aviation app developer gives that green light. And we track all that at iPad Pilot News. You'll find on our homepage a green light graphic that shows which aviation apps are compatible with the latest versions of the operating systems. And for example, iOS 16 for phones has not been recommended yet by any of the aviation app developers. They're still running tests on that to make sure that it is fully compatible. Okay, enough of the kind of general topics as it relates to the iPad. Let's get into the aviation side of things. So quick history, again, iPad first came out 2010, designed as a device for video consumption, reading magazines, reading books, browsing the internet, and obviously useful in many other industries as well, medical industry, quickly picked up on it, and pilots picked up on it because we had a device now that ran a reliable Apple operating system, had a bright screen. For aviation, we could get 3 to 4 hours of battery life. And again, I use the term reliable, and I'm going to keep repeating that because that's very important in the hardware that we run in the cockpit. We want to be able to depend on it on the consumer hardware side. So we as GA pilots picked up on this right away, and that led to companies like ForeFlight being created and further expanding their aviation app offerings. Garmin Pilot jumped in the mix, WingX Pro, et cetera, started to develop aviation apps that initially displayed, again, sectional charts, approach charts, airport facility data, just very basic information that we needed to replace some of the kind of antiquated data that we typically brought along in the cockpit. Now, the corporate side, the airline side, obviously have their eyes on this as well, but they can't just flip a switch like we can and adopt it. They've got to develop much more in terms of standard operating procedures, best practices, so that the entire airline crew, the flight departments are all using the device the same way. So it took them a couple of years to actually bring that on. Now, if you walk into a Boeing Airbus cockpit at the airport, airline airports, you're going to find an iPad most likely in the flight deck. So kind of my takeaway is now that they've been flying with the iPad since probably 2013, 2014, they've developed a lot of best practices and procedures that we as GA pilots should pay attention to, things that we can do to make our operations safer and more reliable as well. Now, before we get into that, we have to cover some of the basics of the legalities. And legalities in this regard relates to advisory circulars. If you open the federal aviation regulations, the FARs, you're not going to find anything as it relates to iPads or tablets. This is all done through advisory circulars. And in the case of 9178, the top one here that I've got listed, which applies to Part 91 operations, the current version was even written before the iPad was even invented. I think it has a published date of 2007 or so, but all the data still applies. And at that time, they were looking at basically pilots bringing in laptops or Kindle devices or another electronic screen in the cockpit. Could have been a screen mounted in the cockpit itself, like a Garmin or an Avidyne screen that displayed aviation data. But that's our advisory circular, and that's our kind of guidance we want to look at when it relates to flying with the iPad. Now, as a flight instructor, I tend to not assign my students to just go ahead and read advisory circulars start to finish. There are some out there I do, but some are kind of wordy and can get a little bit complicated and convoluted. The AC 91-78 is not that way. It's actually a very well written, simple, short. I think it's less than 6 or 7 pages, but it outlines best practices for how to use what they call an electronic flight bag in the cockpit. And you'll hear that term a lot, electronic flight bag, as it relates to the iPad, or EFB for short. And again, that's any device that we bring into the cockpit: iPhone, Android, a laptop, MacBook. You know, it's your call in terms of what you want to use and feel comfortable with. But from a practical perspective, most pilots today have found that an iPad or an Android tablet works the best. So some obvious statements here in the AC that we want to talk about. It mentions that the device must have the functional equivalent of the paper reference material. So what that means is you could go out to FAA.gov, download the sectional images, you could download all the PDFs of approach charts. That's kind of a pain. It's free, but it's a pain and time consuming and not very well organized. So that's why we pay for premium services like ForeFlight, Garmin, WingX, FlyQ, et cetera. Pay roughly $100 to $200 per year, have all this data downloadable through their app. Again, navigation, much more today, obviously, weather, document management, et cetera. But you have to have something that organizes and presents all that aviation data. Another key point, they say a backup source is recommended, but not required. This is, again, a very good general best practice, that you don't just want to take your iPad on an IFR flight, fly into the fog with an instrument approach chart, and have that be your only source of data. So they recommend having a second source. Not required to be legal, but again, a recommendation. And that could come in the form of paper charts or even a second DFB. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And lastly, key takeaway, there's no FAA approval required. So we don't need to talk to the FSDO. We don't need to get a sign off. We don't need any paperwork that says that we're legal to fly with the iPad. Again, here we're focusing on Part 91 operations. So I mentioned we can look at the airline community, the corporate flight community, and develop some best practices based on what they do. And in that world, they have what are called standard operating procedures, or SOPs, that dictate how the iPad is to be used in every phase of flight, right down to when it has to be mounted, secured, minimum battery levels, all kinds of things. Again, to standardize and make sure that every pilot flying with it for a particular FAA approved operation, airline, Part 135, charter operator, etc., does it the same way every single time. And that's what we want to do as GA pilots, have consistency, have routines, and have procedures to make sure that the iPad is available and 100% capable for every single flight. So I break that into 4 categories, some of this based on practical experience, some of this based on the guidance provided to the airlines. But 4 categories: iPad pre-flight, a backup for data, consider a backup for power, and then mounting. So just like we pre-flight the airplane, you want to consider pre-flighting the iPad. Now, if you're new to the device, have a checklist, run through it, check each thing off. As you get comfortable, this is something you're going to do probably in a matter of minutes, and it'll kind of become secondhand to you as you prepare the device. Most of this is obvious, but like many things on our checklist, that's not the point. The point is to have a procedure to follow to verify it's ready each time. So verify that your apps are up to date. We are running software here, and in this kind of new Apple world, we have free software updates that come out. And I guess free is a relative term because we are paying a subscription, but frequent software updates that contain both features and software improvements. Again, I mentioned software tends to be buggy, not so much on the Apple side, but it's not impossible for things to creep in. So you want to make sure you have the latest version of your app downloaded, and you do that from the App Store app on your iPad or iPhone. Now in the air, we don't have internet connectivity, or at least most of us don't in flight. You're not going to be able to connect to ground networks to connect like your phone, like through Verizon or AT&T. They just don't work up at altitude. So all the data for your flight needs to be downloaded to your device, all your sectionals, airport data, etc. So we're going to verify that all the charts are downloaded. 100% battery needs to be full before every single flight. Kind of have a zero tolerance there. Charge it the night before, leave it plugged in when you're not using it, whatever it takes. Set your wireless radios. That relates to your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth. Make sure that if you're not using one of those features in the flight, go ahead and turn it off. It's going to help increase your battery life, extend your battery efficiency. Small one here, but commonly overlooked, is screen brightness. We tend to turn the screen brightness up all the way because that is a criticism and a limitation many pilots have, especially in a bubble cockpit or have a canopy above you, or even some of the low-wing airplanes can tend to make the screen a little tough to see. But if you can lower that screen brightness by 15–20%, you may extend your battery life by an hour or so. So if you don't need the full brightness, go ahead and turn it down, again, to increase the battery length for your flight. And then the backups, which we'll talk about. Again, make sure you have a data backup and a power backup available. So let's talk about chart downloads. When you go into your aviation app, there's typically a dedicated download section where you can pick your type of chart, VFR, IFR, and then get even more specific down to what regions, what states. And that's good to do. So here in Ohio, I typically download Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, the main state that I'm in, and a couple neighboring states. But there's a couple other convenience features and kind of smart tools you should take advantage of. One is called the pack feature. This is in ForeFlight. And that is a feature that after you load your route into the route editor, as you can see here on the left-hand screen, there's a little suitcase button with a red dot, and that tells you that there's data to be downloaded for that trip. And a lot of times it might just be weather, so to get the latest METARs, the latest NOTAMs, etc. But what it's also going to do is evaluate your route with some buffer there, as you can see the kind of surrounding shape. It's going to download all the charts needed for that route. So maybe I'm going here into Frederick. This is an obvious example that we're going through West Virginia and Maryland, but it's going to go ahead and download a little bit from Pennsylvania as well, just in case we have to go a little bit further, deviate, etc. So it's a smart way to make sure all of your data is downloaded, not only just for your destination, but for the points along the way as well. Another feature I really like in ForeFlight is called automatic downloads. You can see it circled there in the main settings. And what that does is every time you open the app, if there is a new chart update available, it's going to go ahead and download that in the background. So these are kind of 2 automated ways to make sure you have all the data. But your final check, I think, at any point before every flight, and this is what I do, is just to open that pack feature one last time and verify that all the data is indeed downloaded. Now, we talked about a data backup plan. If I'm flying a Piper Cub or a Cessna 152 just around the pattern, probably my iPhone is fine as my dedicated source of charts, or an iPad. I probably don't need a backup for that flight. And so your backup really depends on what the mission is of the day. Are you flying IFR into an unfamiliar area, or is it a VFR local flight? And that's going to dictate, I think, how you go about this, and also what you feel comfortable with. There's still a lot of pilots flying with paper, and they're just now making that transition over to electronic tablets like the iPad. And for them, they feel comfortable packing along the terminal procedure publications for IFR flights in the paper form. And that's completely fine. It's whatever you're comfortable with and whatever makes you feel the best about that transition to a digital cockpit. Now, the belts and suspenders on the far right would be a second iPad. That's what a lot of corporate operators use. And obviously in a airline cockpit, there's going to be a couple iPads, one for each pilot. For us, the middle road here, I think, is one of the better options and best options, and it's not going to cost you any extra money, which is to use your iPhone as your backup. Your subscription to ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, for example, includes access to, I think, 2 iPads and a couple iPhones. So you can go ahead and sign in to your account. Again, make sure you treat it the same way as your primary device, pre-flight, download all the data onto your iPhone, but then you have a nice, reliable, solid backup there in hand. And if you think about it, even for the toughest IFR day, all you're really going to need from a data standpoint, most likely the destination, is that instrument approach chart, airport frequencies, etc. So an iPhone can more than suffice for that in that emergency situation if your primary screen fails. I don't even want to call it emergency situation, but that impractical situation, an unlikely situation that the iPad gives up on you. Now, why might that happen? Could be a battery that depletes early. It could overheat. So it's not always just these crazy scenarios of the device itself breaking down, but it's typically either lack of power or a temperature issue. So when it comes to power, if you watch an Apple commercial or the latest promo, they're going to advertise over 10 hours of battery life for an iPad. And that's completely true. And you're probably going to need even more than that, honestly, if you're reading the internet, if you're watching a video, reading a book. The second you start using the iPad as a navigation source, which means connecting it to a GPS, that battery life is going to start to go down more in the 3 to 4 hour range for a new device. And I start to hear from pilots who are using iPad that's 3 or 4 years old, getting down into the 2 or 3 hour range. So for that reason, you want to consider having some type of backup power source. And that comes in multiple forms, just like anything here. There's the fancy options that are very easy. There's portable options, and we'll start in the middle. If you're fortunate to have a cigarette lighter in your cockpit, you can buy a USB charger for less than $20 that plugs in there and will provide you with a couple USB ports. So just like you have your USB charger at home, very cost effective to bring the same item into the airplane. At Sporty's, we offer several versions. They run for 14 or 28 volt systems, so you don't have to worry about buying one specifically for your aircraft electrical system. And the middle one there is a nice added feature of having a digital display that shows the system voltage of your airplane. So if you don't have a voltmeter in your aircraft, that'll show you that right on that little USB charger. So if you're in a Cessna 172, you're going to see 28.5 volts. In an older Bonanza with a 14 volt system, you're going to see that 13.5 to 14 range. It'll even give you a chirp and a light if you drop below what the charging system should supply. So if your alternator were to give out, it's actually going to give you even a warning there. So even a backup sensor essentially for your electrical system. Next option tends to be my favorite because I use this outside of aviation as well, is a backup battery. You can purchase these for less than $40 that can charge your iPad several times, as well as other devices in the cockpit through USB-C or USB-A. A great way to, again, ensure that you have backup power available. And on the far right, for aircraft owners, both Apario, Garmin, and Midcontinent, and a couple other companies make these, which is an installed USB port for your airplane. And in this example, we're showing the Stratus model, which has a couple USB-A ports. You can even get these now with USB-C ports as well. I think they're in the $300 to $400 range, and then installation, obviously, but that's a great way to have a fixed power system in the airplane. So we see a lot of interest in these backup batteries, and I want to highlight the two that we developed here at Sporty's that we see a lot of interest. There's a small version on the right, which is 10,000 milliamp hours, and then the bigger version, and it's bigger in capacity, but really not that much bigger in size. It's a very compact unit, and the slim size fits well in flight bags. But that one provides 20,000 milliamp hours for just under $80. That one there has 3 USB-A ports, has a USB-C port and a USB micro port. and even a lightning port. So the nice thing is it actually can obviously charge your devices. To charge either of these, you can use any of those ports as well. So you're not carrying around a separate charging cable, something we don't want to have to do in our flight bags. The nice thing too on the 20,000 milliamp hour, the big one, this one you can also leave plugged in and charge your device simultaneously. So if you're using it at home, on the go, whatever, it kind of has a dual purpose there and even more utility when you go about that. I leave that 20,000 milliamp hour flight gear backup battery in my backpack at all times, traveling on the road, anywhere I go. And it's amazing. You never know when you're gonna need a little extra power, not just in the airplane, but just anywhere you're driving around or flying around too. So another tip here is to consider the fast charging options that are now available for most of the newer products, both iPad and iPhone. In the early days, we looked at volts. We would consider, is this a 5-volt charger, or sorry, not volts, but amps, and talk about the metrics that way. Now we tend to focus more on wattage, which obviously is a multiplication factor of the volts and amps. And iPads can now, and iPhones, take advantage of what's called fast charging. And this is designed to be able to charge your iPad or your iPhone up to 50% in under 30 minutes. Now, kind of the laws of the battery and how the process works, the faster you charge a battery, the hotter it gets. So it cannot continue to charge it up to 100% in 60 minutes. That time increases considerably. But a great way if you have one of these more advanced chargers to, get on the road or if something happens to be able to charge your device very quickly. And so by default, I think the iPad Air and the iPad Pro come with either an 18 or a 20 watt charger, and that is considered fast charging. iPads can charge at a rate up to around 30 watts or so at the peak. So if you are looking to buy one of these, I'd consider 20 or 30 watts as a minimum. Apple sells both of those, but then you'll also see third-party chargers as well, advertise fast charging features. And some of these go up to 65 or even 96 watts that were designed for laptops or other higher capacity devices. So check your charger out. I put a picture here of the Apple charger. You can see it says 20W here on the left for 20 watts. That would be a good one to have. If you're looking to purchase one, again, I would look for a minimum of 30 watts as the power available. And a key takeaway here too is it's not like you're gonna push too much power. So if you've got a higher wattage, like a 96 watt laptop charger, you can by all means plug your iPad into that, the USB-C cable. The device itself determines how much power it can pull based on what's available. So you're not gonna damage a device by using a higher wattage charger either. And we like to have displays here on our products at Sporty's. As I showed earlier, the USB-C charger for the cigarette lighter. We also have a series of smart charging cables now that actually display what the power is being transferred from the charger to the actual device. So these smart charging cables, we have a USB-C to Lightning and a USB-C to C cable, which will actually show you the flow of power through the cable. In this case, we're showing 20 watts of charging power. And it's got this little PD logo, and I'll bring that up as well. PD stands for power delivery. That's kind of the standard name for that fast charging system. Kind of confusing, but just be aware of that term power delivery. If you see that on your charger, that's a good thing. It means it has that higher output charging capability. Again, this is a little bit of a confusing topic. We have a great article on iPad Pilot News if you want to read more about that, recommending chargers, recommending cables, etc., to make the most of your charging experience. Now, if you have an older iPad, like I said, you're likely going to see the battery capacity start to come down a little bit over time, and that's going to be the natural evolution of any rechargeable battery at this stage. But you can go to the settings app on your iPad, and there's a battery setting there, and you can see which apps are using the most power over a 24-hour period. And for most people, you'll then see the last 7 or last 10 days as well. So it's a great way to identify maybe some apps that have settings that you really don't need to have turned on, like location services or notifications, reminders that are using a lot of power in the background that really aren't providing any utility. So really for all pilots, I recommend every once in a while just checking that battery app, looking at that analysis that's always running in the background and see if there's any optimizations you can make to further improve your battery life. So I mentioned earlier, the iPad software, the hardware is very reliable. But there's really 2 things that are going to make it become unusable in the cockpit. And one is running the battery dead. The second is overheating. And if you've used this device for any more than a couple of years, it's probably happened to you at some point that you see that black screen that says iPad needs to cool down. And what it's doing at that point, it could probably still run, but the iPad is going into kind of a self-preservation mode. We don't want that battery getting much hotter. As many have seen, those lithium polymer batteries, if they get too hot, can catch fire and bad things happen there. And that's very, very, very rare for these devices because there are so many precautions and checks put in place so it doesn't get to that point. But it's very inconvenient. And this can happen not just because you're sitting in a very hot cockpit or a hot car, but the screen itself, if it's facing the sun, say you're in a Piper Cherokee and the iPad's on your lap, and a kneeboard without a lot of airflow over it, and the sun is actually hitting the screen, you might feel comfortable, but that iPad's going to get very, very hot as it absorbs that radiant heat from the sun hitting it. And you'll look down and you'll see that black screen. And the only way to get around it at that point, obviously, is to get it out of the sun, get some airflow on it, and cool it off. Now, some pilots find that they can't avoid that situation based on the area they're flying in, Texas, Florida, based on their cockpit. So there is a good solution here called the X-Knot cooling case. And as you can see in the picture, the iPad fits into this custom designed case that has cooling fans that basically direct the air around the back of the iPad like a heat sink and pull the air around the device and cool it off. So a good solution there for those that have that overheating problem. And you can attach kneeboard straps to this. It is compatible with a lot of the mounting systems. So lots of flexibility there in how you use that X-Knot cooling case. Speaking of mounting, this is kind of the final area as we talk about standard operating procedures that you want to think about, because the cockpit is a very dynamic environment. Takeoffs and landings, a lot of G-forces, we have turbulence, we have turns, pitch, banks, etc. We don't want the iPad just sitting on our lap or sitting on the floor. So it's very important that you consider some kind of mounting or security option. In the two big broad classifications, you can really go the kneeboard route, which is a modern day version of the traditional kneeboards that pilots are flying with before the iPad, or an airplane mount. And I could do a presentation probably and talk an hour just on mounts alone, but I just want to bring about kind of the key topics here to consider. And it really comes down to personal preference. And if you're a kneeboard person, it's going to work great with the iPad and keep it very slim. On the mounting side, as I showed earlier in some of the pictures with the iPad mini, you have suction cup options that can go on the side window. You have clamps, and the clamps provide all kinds of versatility based on what's available in your airplane. They can go on the yoke, they can go on the glare shield, they can go on any kind of exposed airplane structure like a bar coming into the cockpit, common on Piper airplanes or Citabria, Decathlon, those kind of airplanes. And when it comes down to the kind of brands that to consider, of course, the Sporty's flight gear that we're very partial to. Not only are they very high quality, but we developed them here ourselves based on now 12 years of experience flying with the iPad. So the products you're seeing today are on their probably 5th or 6th generation of development, things we've learned over the years, feedback from pilots, what works, what doesn't work. I like to consider these very mature products now and worked out a lot of the inconveniences that some of the generation 1 and generation 2 iPad mounts and kneeboards, etc., have gone through. On the mounting side, RAM mounts makes a great selection of options. And then also my GoFlight makes a great selection of both kneeboards, cases, and mounting fixtures. And those tend to be on the premium side. So they're going to be a little more expensive, but have some higher end features that pilots really like. One other one that hit the scene in the last couple of years I like to bring up also is the robust mounting system. And what's unique about this is that it's a universal system. So in the RAM days, the RAM mounts and even my GoFlight, even a lot of pivot cases, you have to buy a mount or fixture that matches your specific iPad model. So if you bought an iPad Air from 3 years ago, the latest iPad Air is a different size now. That mount and that cradle will no longer work. Well, the robust system uses more of a universal approach where it comes with various pieces and adapters that are very simple to assemble, but they will grow as your iPad's needs change. So if you went from a full iPad to an iPad mini, that same kit works just fine. If you go from an iPad mini to a full-size iPad, same thing. It's the same kit, so you're not buying it based on iPad size. You're purchasing it based on the actual attachment device, whether it's a suction cup or a clamp. And even then, it's a ball joint mounting system, so it's universal, so you can always upgrade that or change that out later as well. You start out at $39 for the iPhone version. Some of the iPad versions are only $10 more, so very cost effective but very secure, and a good investment that'll allow you to grow and change as your iPad needs change. A lot of pilots like the kneeboard option, but they don't like the bulk that sometimes they provide because there has to be a way to secure the iPad with straps and Velcro and various things. So if you're looking for a way to secure it to your lap without a lot of bulk, consider the MyClip Multi. We call it a kneeboard, but it's really a very basic slim strap and a clamp that connects to your iPad, has Velcro that goes around your leg, and it's a great way to, again, just to secure it if you don't need the extra bells and whistles like pen and paper or extra pockets to go along with an e-board. And the last point here with kind of the securing theme is to stay organized. So back in 20 years ago when I learned to fly, we had these big duffel bags where you put your headset, but you also carried lots of books, the FARs, and just all kinds of study resources. Well, the iPad's not only taken our charts, sectionals, et cetera, and digitized them, it's also streamlined the training environment as well. Most of our training is now done on the iPad as well, whether it's video training in like Sporty's pilot training app, reading the FARs, reading handbooks, et cetera. So our needs have changed as well. But with the iPad and a lot of our electronic accessories, we have the need for more organization for our charging accessories, for our cables, our radios, batteries, et cetera. So I think it's very important to pick a bag that allows you to stay organized, find the things you need in the cockpit quickly, and then be able to grab them when you need them in flight, or as you prepare ahead of time, with flashlights and all that kind of thing. So choose a bag and consider a bag that has those features, because again, that's just as important in those times of an urgent need when things aren't going well. If you've got to find that battery pack, you need to know where to look. And that all starts with having a good organized flight bag. Okay, the second or next phase of the presentation, I want to talk about how we can use the iPad as a digital co-pilot. So again, we're considering most of us are flying Part 91 single pilot, and we want to use the iPad to maximize our utility in the airplane. And when things get hectic, we want to have the right data displayed. We want it to be proactive. And that's a lot of the same attributes of a good co-pilot, right? If you're flying in a two-person crew, which I have a lot of experience in, you have a pilot flying in the left seat and then a pilot not flying in the right seat, often referred to as the co-pilot. That person provides timely information before and during a flight, calls out abnormalities or flight deviations, and assists with duties during high workload phases of flight. 3 attributes that the iPad excels at as well when set up properly. So let's start with the pre-flight. We're going to kind of go through a flight from start to finish. And I want to point out another advisory circular. And again, this is a good one. This is one of those ones that's relatively easy to read and provides lots of good guidance to pilots. This one came out March of 2021 and kind of dispelled a lot of myths and confusion, especially for those that have been flying for 20 or 30 years. We all grew up with flight service, DUATs. That was our primary source of pre-flight weather information. We transitioned into using our laptop with the Aviation Weather Center. We now use the Leidos flight service website. We use our iPad and ForeFlight Garmin Pilot for aviation weather. But a lot of people felt, I don't want to say guilty, but felt like they were cheating the system by just doing a self-service weather briefing and not calling flight service. And so a lot of pilots still said you had to call flight service or make contact with flight service before every single flight to be legal. And this is one of those things, legal versus safe. You probably had all the information you needed, but you're still making that call just to check the box. Well, AC 91-92 gets rid of that concept. They actually encourage pilots to go about a self-briefing if they feel comfortable. They consider flight service as available for assistance, but not something that you have to contact. So if you feel comfortable using your iPad for all your weather data, and you're checking all available information, forecast reports, TFRs, NOTAMs, et cetera, you're completely legal. And so the AC isn't just designed, this one in particular, just designed to be a legal explanation, but it actually gives a lot of tips also on how to maximize the self-briefing concept. And so I do recommend checking that out if you have some time to do some reading. Now, one way that you can facilitate that, and ForeFlight does a great job with this, is to use the built-in weather briefing tool in your app. And ForeFlight, I think, is probably the best one out there as they connect and bring data in from flight service and present the information the same way as if you called a briefer. And you can see there on the left-hand side, it shows that standard briefing in the menu, the same way a briefer would start out: adverse conditions, synopsis, current weather, forecasts, etc. I use this every time as kind of a backup tool to check NOTAMs, to check TFRs. I probably have a pretty good idea already just from my briefing using the maps section of ForeFlight. This is kind of a good way to kind of do a final check to make sure you're not missing anything. And they're also bringing in some of the latest charts from the Aviation Weather Service. Like on the right-hand side, there is their cloud forecast tool, where it's going to forecast cloud bases, cloud tops, etc., for the region you'll be flying in. So it's a great way that if you've kind of gotten into a rut with your weather briefing to check that out, and there might be some new products there that you didn't even realize existed. Now for IFR pilots, when it comes time to planning a route, this is one of my biggest, I guess, challenges when I first learned to fly instrument IFR flying back in the early 2000s. Was flying between two busy airports, following a route that I thought was going to be correct, but then getting a full route clearance from clearance delivery when it came time to go. And those days are over if you use your tools properly. So both of these apps, after you enter in your departure and destination airport, will show you frequently cleared routes between those airports by ATC. And not only the routes at those departure and destinations, but at what altitude they were filed at as well. So if you're flying a Bonanza, you can ignore the stuff above flight level 180. If you're flying a corporate jet up in the flight levels, you can pay attention to those routings based on the altitude. Every single time that I've filed one of these routes that was recently cleared by ATC, call it clearance delivery, you're going to hear cleared as filed. Very simple. You've already got your flight plan entered in your app, likely already have it entered into your GPS navigator in the cockpit, and you're on your way. So it really eliminates that confusion of calling clearance delivery with a full route clearance and then having to overthink it ahead of time. Another way that the iPad can help with your pre-flight briefing, here again we're looking at ForeFlight, is that in the past we would traditionally look at the airport diagram and the taxiway layout, but there's some newer tools now, like the 3D views here, that you can look at the taxiway and runway layout using satellite imagery. And then for night operations and IFR operations, you can research the runway lighting ahead of time, as you can see there in that 3D night view. This is really helpful for instrument pilots who may not always know what the symbology means on the instrument approach chart for the runway lighting at the airport. But now you look at this 3D picture here, it's very clear what you're going to expect to see, and very helpful when flying in low visibility conditions to know what to expect ahead of time when you get down and break out after an instrument approach. From a cost perspective, and AOPA has done a great job at advocating for this, to have FBOs present and publish their fee schedule for overnight fees, for ramp usage, hangar fees, etc. So check out the FBO section of your app. This is Garmin Pilot and ForeFlight here. We were in the FBO section and then looking at the fees for that airport. A great way to research ahead of time. I still think it's worth calling the FBO before every flight just to check availability of parking and services, but might help you research airports and the best FBO before you actually get to that phase of settling in on which airport you're going to be landing at. NOTAMs are another kind of sore topic, and they're getting better. The main NOTAM system is still fundamentally flawed and how it presents just lots and lots of data for an airport. If you do get that full weather briefing, you might see pages and pages of NOTAMs for tower light outages and a lot of things that really just don't matter. And what can happen is the really important NOTAMs can get lost in that full briefing. Well, what the apps tend to do today, and again, we're looking at ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot as main examples, is bring NOTAMs front and center to your attention in the places that matter most. So here we're looking at an airport diagram, and it says at the top there in the red box, there are 16 NOTAMs. It's very hard to miss that box, and there's a very good chance that before you fly, you're going to look at the airport diagram to research again taxiway layouts, runway layouts, and where the FBO is located. So it puts those NOTAMs front and center for taxiway closures, runway closures, or actual lighting at the airport that really matters. Now, along those lines, when looking at the actual airport screens, if there is a runway or airport closure, you're also going to see those in those little pop-up windows. So they're on the left-hand side in ForeFlight. We can see that there are runways closed at Minneapolis. And then again, when viewing the actual airport screen, we can see the runways are closed there as well. So even if we didn't do our due diligence and didn't get a full briefing, didn't call flight service, it's a pretty good chance you're going to end up at the airport's page at some point before the flight and see that runway closure information. Now for instrument pilots, we have to consider alternates available at the destination based on the weather forecast and also factoring in what approaches are available. And when the flights, in the flight section of ForeFlight, there is what's called the alternate advisor. And this little tool here looks around at the various airports near your destination to assess the weather forecast at the time of arrival, gives you a quick view of what the TAF is forecasting for that arrival time, and gives you a distance in terms of time and fuel burn to get to that alternate airport. So it's a great way to research. If you're in a familiar area, you probably already have some ideas in mind, but this is a great way just to quickly evaluate the options within 30, 40 miles of your destination. Another feature commonly overlooked, and this one's not available for all airports, but for the big, typically airline served airports, the Class B, Class C airports, they publish a digital ATIS, and ForeFlight actually pulls this data and will show it in the weather screen. So here we're looking at Nashville on the weather tab, and you'll see this option here for D ATIS, which will actually show you in this case, the singular ATIS for the airport. Some airports have both arrival and departure ATIS, but a good way to do a little bit of research ahead of time if you are going to one of these busy airports to learn what runways are in use, what approaches are in use, and then any NOTAMs or unusual activity going around. Just one more way to be more prepared instead of hearing the ATIS for the first time, when 50 to 100 miles out from the destination. Another good one, this is an automated tool, but it takes a little bit of work ahead of time to set it up, and you really just have to do this once for your airplane. But from a high level perspective, this is called the Glide Advisor in ForeFlight, and Garmin Pilot has something similar. But what this will do when you turn on this layer, it'll show you that turquoise, it kind of looks like a ring or a goofy shape around your current position. That's basically where your airplane can glide based on your glide profile entered in ForeFlight. So you have an abrupt situation, an emergency where the engine gives out in a single engine airplane, quickly turn on Glide Advisor, you're gonna see where you can approximately get to based on your current altitude. Now, you have to set this up ahead of time. It doesn't know what airplane you're in, obviously. So make sure you go into any aircraft that you regularly fly in the profile settings for that airplane and enter in your best glide speed and your glide ratio. So like a 172, for example, best glide speed, 65 knots, using approximately a 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 glide ratio. But that way, get that done ahead of time. And if the unlikely situation happens where you do have to do a power off glide, you have one tap and you have that kind of helpful information to show you what your options are. Another good one when landing at non-towered airports is the runway analysis tool. And this is going to evaluate the current winds and provide the best runway. Now here we're looking at Lexington runway 4 and 22. And it's showing us that the ideal runway would be runway 22 with a 8 to 10 knot headwind component and a 12 to 16 knot tailwind component. So it's going to evaluate basically, especially at airports where you have multiple runways, to kind of do some of that math for you if you have concerns about the crosswind limitations for your airplane or your own personal minimums of what the optimum runway is. And maybe if those numbers are exceeded, maybe you need to think about going to a different airport. But just simply open up that airports page and you're going to see that data displayed automatically. Now this is probably my favorite overall feature, which is the alerts function in ForeFlight. And it started off very small, limited, but today it's grown. There's probably 15 to 20 different alerts it can provide. And most of these are turned on by default, but I'd still recommend, if you haven't looked at this recently, to go into your ForeFlight settings and check out all the different options there. Not only to verify that they are turned on, but it's a good way to study and become familiar again with what all the alerts are and what the options are. I want to cover a couple of those here just to familiarize everyone. And what these alerts will do, they're contextual based on what's going on around you, your location, even inputs from third-party devices to display a visual message on the screen, plus an audio alert in the app. And now, obviously in a noisy cockpit, your iPad speaker is loud, but it's not that loud, and it's tough to hear alerts coming over just the general speaker of your device. So my first recommendation before we go on is if you do have a headset that has Bluetooth capability, like a Bose, Lightspeed, David Clark, any of those more recent headsets, most of them have Bluetooth connectivity now. Go ahead and pair your headset to your iPad. A lot of pilots will do this anyway just to be able to listen to music or their information on flight. But this will also pipe through all your apps audio alerts as well to your headset. A great way, kind of a heads up alerting feature that if you're not looking at your device, you're still going to be aware of those alerts. So I break these down into different categories. The first set here, what I kind of call helpful callouts, again, based on the flight context. On the far left, if you are descending through flight level 180, coming down from the standard flight levels, which are based on altimeter setting of 2992, the iPad will display the nearest altimeter setting, provided you are flying with an ADS-B weather receiver. So provided that you do have weather data being fed into your iPad. So a great way to look down and see the latest altimeter setting as you descend below flight level 180, below 18,000 feet. The next one will be the nearest weather for your destination. So it's going to display the ATIS or AWOS frequency as you get in range. That's going to depend on your speed and how high you are, but it'll give you that information so that you'll look down 50 to 100 miles out and see what frequency to dial in. And it gets you again kind of thinking about that. If you're busy, hopefully you're planning ahead and preparing for that. But if you are busy, it can get your attention and maybe prevent you from forgetting that crucial step as you approach an airport. On the far right is a final approach runway reminder. In this case, it's giving us a 3-mile warning that we are out and lined up with runway 21 left. So great visual reminder to verify that you are lined up at the correct airport and the correct runway. Next set here are time-sensitive warnings, more urgent information. So if you are using an ADS-B weather receiver that also supplies ADS-B traffic, nearby airplanes, helicopters, etc., it will give you that traffic alert when you are within a certain distance and altitude of nearby airplanes. It'll give you that visual alert, and you'll also hear that same reading over your headset if you are connected. Of course, TFRs need to be aware of those. Again, this will be downloaded hopefully to your device if you use that pack feature. All the TFR data will be stored ahead of time, but also if you have an ADS-B weather receiver, TFRs are continuously updated. And I think it's every 15 minutes or so. So you'll get an alert there as well for approaching TFRs. And then a very important obstacle and terrain hazard alert when approaching within 1,000 and then 100 feet of nearby terrain or obstacles. And that's going to happen automatically, get your attention. If you are flying IFR at night and don't visually have a line of sight with that obstruction, get your attention to turn or climb immediately. Now on the ground, we'll get notices for when entering a runway and approaching a runway, both the runway number and then how many feet are remaining. So a good way, again, is to kind of do a mental check, make sure that you are in the right location and that the runway distance available, if you're using an intersection departure, for example, that you do have enough runway based on your planned performance for that day. I mentioned before the iPad will shut down when it gets too hot. ForeFlight actually can monitor the temperature of the iPad and give you a preemptive warning before you even get to that point. So kind of an advanced warning that, hey, your iPad is getting hot based on the current location, do something immediately. Now in this case here, if you look at the picture, there's a cable plugged in, we're in the sun. The obvious answer there is to get it out of the sun. But also one key point I'll mention is that while charging your iPad, that actually generates more heat. So if you find yourself in a situation where it is frequently overheating, it could be likely due to the fact that you're charging it and really exaggerating that effect as well. So if you can get by, obviously we only can do so much, but try to avoid charging it in those higher heat situations. Another example, so if you're flying with ForeFlight and the Sentry ADS-B weather receiver, that does have a carbon monoxide detector. And so the actual ADS-B receiver itself, the actual Sentry, will provide an aural alert and a note on the screen of the device, but you'll also get that same alert in ForeFlight with ppm levels as well. Okay, switching gears for IFR pilots. Again, we're kind of talking about how to use the iPad as a digital co-pilot to provide helpful information. For IFR pilots, we don't get assigned holds very often, but when we do, we're probably out of practice on them. We're required to do them every 6 months or so for IFR currency, but practically speaking, we just don't get assigned holds very often. So use your tools in the airplane. The GTN and the Garmin series of avionics can help with holds. ForeFlight can as well. You can tap any waypoint and you'll see a add hold option. And like the Glide Advisor where you had to set that up ahead of time, this is one of those tools I'd recommend practicing on the ground. So kind of make up an assigned hold in your mind and then go ahead and practice setting that up in ForeFlight. Another great feature for all pilots when landing at an airport with an airport diagram. This one will automatically switch the screen to show you the airport diagram and your location on the chart as you decelerate on the runway. So as you decelerate maybe 30, 40 knots or so based on GPS ground speed, obviously your eyes are outside during landing, but as you decelerate and start to look about where the nearest taxiway is or where to go, you'll find that your iPad has already switched screens to show the taxiway. A great feature, again, for less heads down time, less kind of button pushing and searching, and allows you to focus on runway surface operations and talking to air traffic control to get the instructions on where to taxi. Another good one, and I've been flying a Piper airplane recently that we have to switch the fuel tanks about every hour or so, and I use the timer for this as a reminder. And so ForeFlight and Garmin both have built-in timers. You can see here at the bottom, you can count up or set a predetermined time to count down. And this is a great way to kind of use this for fuel timer, maybe an in-range timer based on how much fuel you have total, all different ways to think about that. Maybe some kind of oxygen limitations when flying at higher altitudes. But we have various timers throughout our iPad, and it's a great way to keep that all in your One Aviation app to track it there. All right, we're going to go a little bit long here. I appreciate everyone for sticking around, but I want to wrap up with a little bit of a look at data link weather, because it is an important part as it relates to our iPad flying, because the iPad was really one of the first devices that allowed us to view data link weather in a cost-effective way in the cockpit, and the first time we could ever do it without paying a subscription. So very, very important. So before that, we had very limited options in terms of keeping up with weather going around us. If you were fortunate to fly typically a turbine-powered airplane that required onboard weather radar, you had a picture of 40 to 80 miles out in front of you of what the precipitation was doing around you. Most of us didn't have that luxury flying our Cessna or Cirrus airplane. So we had flight service or flight watch to call, or we had to make that radio call to a separate person, get an update on the frequency of what's going on around us. Well, the days of that are pretty much over. Just like the weather briefing before flight, in-flight weather updates are now self-service as well, thanks to these in-flight weather tools from ADS-B and SiriusXM. And that's really a good thing, that we can now make our own decisions and have a lot more information to help guide our flights and our decision making. And me personally, I think my biggest takeaway with this tool is I've been able to probably launch on days on flights that I would have canceled in the past, knowing that I can keep an eye on things and have basically an out if something doesn't go as forecast. So I can, get a little bit closer, keep an eye on how the convective activity is developing, how the visibility is developing, et cetera, at the destination. Where in the past, if I didn't have those in-flight updates, I probably would not have even gone in the first place. So a quick review of ADS-B. There's two really main components. On the left side is the ADS-B out transponder. That's that requirement to fly basically anywhere that required a Mode C transponder prior to 2020. So in Class B airspace, Class C, above 10,000 feet, et cetera. And that's a certified piece of avionics that has to be installed by a professional, signed off on, all that good stuff. On the other side is the ADS-B in component. And this is an optional system that allows us to bring in that weather and traffic in the cockpit. And for this, we don't need to have a certified system. We can use a portable device like a Stratus or a Sentry and display it right on our aviation app. And so the way that works is there are ground stations across the US, as an example there on the left, that broadcast up into the sky, also tracking obviously air traffic for air traffic control purposes, but they also broadcast weather and traffic data up to us. Have a device like Sentry that then picks up that data, which then wirelessly broadcasts it to the devices in your cockpit, like your iPad or your iPhone. So a very seamless system. You basically suction cup the Sentry or Stratus to your side window, turn it on, go flying. The rest just happens automatically. So a really nice utility without adding extra workload to our flight. So I mentioned it's subscription free, very important. It's a government provided service. We're not paying a monthly fee. Once you own the hardware, you're good to go then. So you're gonna get things like weather radar, probably the most important and product most pilots are interested in, especially flying in the South in the summertime. But you're also gonna get text weather updates, METARs, TAFs, pilot reports. Another component is the traffic display. So you're gonna see nearby traffic in almost real time. And these are portable. So again, they're not certified, which means the price is much more affordable than a panel mount system. Typically have a battery for their operation. Now, in terms of kind of supplemental components that make them even more useful, is all of these also have a GPS built in. So your ADS-B receiver is going to supply your position data if you don't already have an iPad with GPS built in it. They're going to connect wirelessly, either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And many also have an optional AHRS, which is an attitude heading reference system. So it can even provide pitch and bank data to your iPad. So the latest product on the scene is the Sentry Plus. This is the next generation of the original Sentry that ForeFlight introduced several years ago. It has a integrated OLED screen, OLED screen, that's going to provide various flight data and status data on the screen, sunlight readable as OLED screens are. It's going to provide GPS accuracy, has a G meter, so you'll see a real-time display of Gs, carbon monoxide status, etc. This also has a flight data recorder, which we're seeing a lot of interest in recently, that allows the device to record all the metrics of your flight, GPS, pitch, bank, Gs, all that kind of information that you can then review on the ground later as a debriefing tool. Very valuable in the flight training environment to see your flight, maybe analyze your instrument approaches, etc. Has a carbon monoxide detector, so another safety feature built into the system. And again, this one works only with ForeFlight. ForeFlight developed the product for that purpose, so singular app compatibility. Again, this builds on the original Sentry, which has been out for a couple of years and is still available. Lower price point at $499. Has all the core features still: GPS, weather, traffic, still plenty of long 12-hour battery life. Both of these have the AHRS, so attitude and heading reference system, and the Sentry also has the carbon monoxide detector. And again, ForeFlight developed Sentry with UAvionics, so that is the only app that Sentry will work with. Now, good news is Stratus, in the latest version, Stratus 3, provides many of these same features, the ADS-B, weather, traffic, but works with just about every app out there. So in addition to ForeFlight, it's going to work with WingX Pro, Flight Plan Go, Stratus Insight, FlyQ, and many, many more. So if you're flying with one of these other apps, Stratus 3 is your answer. Now, a couple important points. I don't want to spend too much time here on data link weather at the end as we're wrapping up. And I'll mention we have a full presentation from my colleague, John Zimmerman, recently presented a data link weather webinar available on the Sporty's YouTube channel. But the point here is that this is not real-time weather. So as much as you want to believe that that thunderstorm is right where it says it is, convective activity changes and evolves very, very quickly. And so what we're looking at here is roughly 10 to 12 minute old data. So if we're looking at that picture on the screenshot, I'm not going to use this picture alone if those are embedded thunderstorms to try to pick my way through that. The point of the system is to evaluate further out, much further out, and watch the trend of how the data is evolving, how the systems are growing or weakening, and the direction of movement, and probably plan a route around it altogether if you can't see it. Now, there's obviously days when there's pop-up cumulus clouds become, those tall, towering cumulonimbus clouds, and there's plenty of gaps in between them. And if you can see it, that's fine. But for the embedded type stuff like this here that we're looking at, the goal here is basically to plan a route around it the best you can, and further out as well, which will save you some fuel instead of going right up to the system, having to make a sharp left or right turn to then go around it. So as this picture points out, use your eyeballs. No matter what that data link weather is showing, your eyes always win. And that's really telling you what's at real time. But use a system, from a bigger picture perspective to help, pick a route around these systems as far out as possible. Okay, last slide here. I just want to bring this up because we get a lot of questions on it. And this is probably the next big thing for pilots in aviation and the iPad, and that is satellite connectivity. And we've been talking about this for a decade now, and you can get internet connectivity in the cockpit, but it requires installed systems that cost tens of thousands of dollars, and the monthly plans can be very, very expensive. So what's kind of encouraging is the latest iPhone 14 models from Apple do include some basic satellite connections. Apple is actually a big investor and owns the majority of Globalstar, which is a satellite network. And they're using this as an emergency SOS feature. So really designed for people out in the wild, camping, hiking. If you were to get off the grid and needed to contact emergency services, you could point your iPhone at the sky, make a connection, send your location to get first responders to come to your position. So that's kind of opening the door, I think, for some very basic internet connection via satellites. T-Mobile also announced that they're going to have a satellite-based cell coverage system coming in 2023. It's probably a little ambitious, but it does show that they're working with some of the satellite providers to provide some more connection options based on existing hardware in space. We'll see if that actually happens by next year, but again, it shows that where the door's starting to open, we're starting to see some light come in. I think that's really important for pilots as we start talking about communicating with people on the ground, sending updates about our flight position, our flight location. Where I think it's really going to be valuable is for better distribution of pilot reports, to share data about what's going on in flight, to generate a lot more pilot reports that aren't reliant on us talking to our traffic control. And then Elon Musk's company, Starlink, continues to deploy satellites into low orbit. And right now they require a stationary, for the most part, antenna to pick up that information. But again, I can see that system evolving to possibly provide, something for pilots in our portable devices in the future, and open a lot more opportunities for communication from the cockpit. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap up. I've got a couple questions here. What iPad do I use? So my iPad in my flight, again, this is for both my corporate operation and personally, I fly with an iPad Mini 6. And that's also the iPad I use for just about everything on the go, email, checking the internet, etc. And so for that, I use the 256 gigabyte version. They start out at 64 is the bare minimum, and that'll work for aviation, but you're going to want to consider a little bit more just based on what your usage is. If you're going to have some movies or games for kids, etc., you're going to want to have a little bit extra storage. And once you buy your iPad, you can upgrade it. So, go with a little bit extra if you can at the beginning. It's going to help future-proof it and extend its life down the road. As far as accessories, I fly with the Century Plus now. Biggest upgrade there of all the things I've talked about is the 18-hour battery life. Knowing that it's always going to have enough battery, and if for some reason the flight extends for the day or whatever it might be, I have to worry about charging my iPad, I know the Century Plus is going to be there the entire time. Another question, how often do you upgrade your iPad? How long will a brand new iPad last? And I'll tell you what, I would have said the same thing probably 4 or 5 years ago. The hardware coming out today is just so much more future-proof in terms of what Apple's doing, because we've gotten to a point now where every piece of hardware far exceeds the aviation app requirements. So provided you take care of your battery, and you could even replace your battery. That's the nice thing about it too. So that's probably going to be the weakest link after maybe 3-4 years. If you're happy with the performance of the hardware, it's easy to go to the Apple Store or an Apple service provider and replace the battery. So it's not unheard of to get 4 or 5 years out of your iPad these days. The other limitation too is eventually Apple stops supporting certain older models with the latest operating system. So between the battery and the operating system support, that's probably going to be what the cutoff is going to end up being for the life of the product.